Hey, my name is Levi. I'm 31 years old and I make my living putting broken things back together. I restore old farmhouses and barns up and down a long green valley in western Montana, near a town called Marlow that's small enough that everybody knows whose truck is whose by the sound of the engine coming up the road. I live alone at the end of a gravel lane in a 100-year-old homestead I've been rebuilding board by board for the last 4 years, which is its own story and a sadder one. And we'll get to it. I like the work because wood is honest. You sand back the paint, and you find the truth of a thing. Where it cracked, where it was patched, where somebody a century ago loved it enough to fix it instead of throwing it out. People were always harder than that for me. People paint over the cracked parts and smile and tell you everything's fine right up until the whole wall comes down. So I kept to my tools and my dog and my road, and I told myself that was a life, and most days it was enough. I never planned to fall in love. Somewhere along the way, I'd decided I wasn't built for it. And then one evening in late June, in a downpour hard enough to drown the whole sky, a woman in a soaking wet wedding dress yanked open the passenger door of my truck, climbed in dripping all over my seat, stared straight ahead through the rain, and whispered 2 words. Just drive. And God help me, I drove. I'd grown up in this valley on the wrong end of it, and that matters to the story, so let me say it plainly. My family had a small place once, 40 acres and a leaning barn, and when I was a boy, a man named Sterling Calhoun decided he wanted the whole east side of the valley. And one by one he got it. A foreclosure here, a water dispute there, a low offer made to a man who'd just lost a season to drought and didn't have the strength to say no. My father held out longer than most, and it broke him to do it. And when we finally lost the place, he was never the same. And he died when I was 19 of what the doctor called heart failure, and what I've always privately called heartbreak. So I left. I learned a trade in another state, learned to take ruined houses and bring them back. And 4 years ago, I came home with a truck full of tools and bought back our old homestead from the bank for cash. And I've been quietly fixing it ever since. Board by board, like a man trying to mend something that can't really be mended anymore. The Calhouns still own half the valley. Their name's on the feed store and the bank's biggest sign. And to people like them, people like me have always been the help. The carpenter, the loaner up the gravel road, never quite a real person. I tell you all this so you understand why, when I finally looked over and realized exactly whose truck that runaway bride had climbed into, my first feeling wasn't tenderness. It was something a lot closer to dread. But I'm getting ahead of myself. That evening, I was driving home from a job 2 valleys over, bone-tired, rain coming down in sheets so heavy the wipers couldn't keep up, when I saw her. She was running down the shoulder of the county road in a wedding dress gone gray and heavy with water, no umbrella, no coat, the train of it dragging through the mud behind her like something dying. There was a white church up the rise behind her, all lit up, cars packed in the lot, and she was running away from it as fast as a person can run in soaked silk and ruined heels. I slowed without even deciding to, and before I'd fully stopped, she was at my door. Wrenching it open, climbing up into the cab, slamming it behind her, and she pressed herself back against the seat with her eyes shut and her chest heaving, and she said it again, lower like a prayer. Please, just drive. Don't ask me anything. Just drive. Now, a smart man asks questions. A smart man does not let a stranger in a wedding dress dictate the terms. But I had spent my whole life watching that white church on the hill belong to people who took whatever they wanted. And there was something in the way she was shaking that I recognized from the inside. And so I put the truck in gear, and I pulled back onto the road, and I drove. And neither of us said a single word for 11 miles. She didn't cry. I think that's what got me. A person who's been crying looks for comfort. A person who's done crying years ago just stares straight ahead, and that's what she did. Knuckles white in her lap, rain sliding down the window beside her face. After a while, the lights of the church were long gone behind us, and I couldn't keep driving into the dark forever. So I said, as gently as I knew how, I'm not going to ask you what happened, but I need to know where I'm taking you. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said in a voice scraped raw, I don't have anywhere to take. No phone. She'd left it. No purse, no keys, no money, nothing but a wedding dress and whatever she was running from. She said she couldn't go to her family. She said she couldn't go to any hotel in the county because everyone in the county knew the dress. And she said the next part so quietly I almost missed it under the rain. If you take me back, I'll lose everything. And if you let me go, I'll lose everything too. So I don't really know what I'm asking you for. If you've ever met a person who's run out of doors that don't cost something, you know exactly the kind of tired I heard in that. I drove another mile and then I turned off onto my gravel road and I said, I've got a couch nobody uses and a stove and a dog who'll like you more than he likes me. Tonight you don't have to decide anything. That's the whole offer. She looked at me for the first time then, really looked, like she was checking my face for the catch in it. And finding none or too tired to keep looking, she nodded. I gave her dry clothes, an old flannel and sweatpants that swallowed her whole, and a towel. And I built up the wood stove because June in the mountains can still bite after rain. And I made the only thing I know how to make well, which is eggs and fried potatoes and thick toast. And I set it in front of her and didn't say a word about the wedding dress dripping over my bathtub like the ghost of a day gone wrong. She ate like she hadn't in a while, which surprised me, and Scout, my old shepherd, put his head in her lap, and her hand found his ears without her seeming to notice, and some of the rigid set went out of her shoulders. I'm Levi, I said finally. She looked at the food, at the dog, at the rough, warm room I'd built with my own hands. Clara, she said, and then, because she could tell I already half knew and she was too honest to let me find out the worst way, she added, quiet. Clara Hale, the wedding you saw, it was mine. I was supposed to marry Royce Calhoun this afternoon. I was standing at the front of that church in front of 300 people, and the preacher asked if anyone objected, and I realized the only person in the whole building who objected was me. So I ran, and there it was. The name landed in my gut the way it always does. Calhoun. The girl I'd pulled out of the rain was marrying into the family that had broken my father. And my first ugly thought was that I'd rescued one of them. She must have seen it cross my face, because something in her went careful again, the shutters coming down. You know them, she said. It wasn't a question. Everybody in this valley knows the Calhouns, I said, and I heard the cold in my own voice and couldn't quite stop it. Some of us better than others, she set down her fork. And then Clara Hale told me the truth, the whole of it, in the flat, careful way of someone who's said it to herself 100 times and never once out loud. She wasn't marrying Royce Calhoun for love. She wasn't even marrying him because she liked him. She was marrying him because her father had died 18 months ago and left her the Hale Ranch, 4 generations. The last real independent spread on the west side of the valley, and 3 brutal years of drought and cattle prices had buried that ranch in debt. And the bank that held the note was, of course, the Calhoun Bank. Sterling Calhoun had come to her with an offer dressed up as a kindness. Marry my son, and the debt disappears, and the ranch stays in the family, your family, forever. Refuse, and the foreclosure goes through in the fall, and the Hale Ranch becomes Calhoun land like everything else. So you see, she said, and her voice didn't shake, which was somehow worse than if it had. I wasn't running from a man today. I was running from a price. And the second I ran, I think I made my father's whole life's work disappear. I sat there in my fixed-up kitchen across from a woman whose family was about to be swallowed by the exact machine that had swallowed mine, and the dread I'd felt turned into something else entirely. Because I knew that machine, and I knew it could be fought. You should sleep, I said, because she was gray with exhaustion and there was nothing to be solved at midnight. She took the couch and Scout took the floor beside her without being asked, traitor that he is. And I lay awake upstairs, listening to the rain ease off, and thinking about Sterling Calhoun and my father, and a leaning barn we lost when I was a boy. By morning, the sky had scrubbed itself clean and blue, and I came down to find Clara already up, the borrowed flannel rolled at the sleeves, standing at my window looking out at the back 40 where my own collapsed barn still leaned. You're rebuilding the homestead, she said, not turning around. Slowly, I said. 4 years and counting. She was quiet a moment. My great-grandfather built our barn, she said. I used to think I'd raise my own kids in that house." Then she turned, and the careful shutters were down again, and her voice was brisk. "I have to go back, Levi. You know that, don't you? If I don't marry Royce, the ranch is gone by October. And that's not just dirt, that's everyone who works it. The Mendozas who've been there 30 years. My mother's whole. I can't let 4 generations in because I had cold feet at an altar." And I said the thing I'd already decided in the dark. That wasn't cold feet. "And you're not going back. Eat something. We're going to go see a woman named Etta Boone." Etta Boone is 74 years old, stands about 5 feet tall, and is the single most stubborn human being in the state of Montana. She runs the Boone Ranch on the north end of the valley, the only other independent spread the Calhouns never managed to take, and she's outlasted them out of pure spite for 30 years. She'd known my father. She'd watched the Calhouns grind him down, and she'd never forgiven them for it. And when I pulled up her drive with a runaway Hale bride in my passenger seat, she came out onto her porch wiping her hands on a dish towel and looked the two of us over and said, "Well, it's about time somebody in this valley ran the right direction." Over coffee at her kitchen table, Etta listened to the whole thing without interrupting, which for Etta is a miracle, and when Clara got to the part about being a price, about marrying to clear a debt, Etta set her cup down hard. "Now you listen to me, girl," she said. "A person is not a debt to be paid. You hear me? Don't you ever let anybody, your daddy's bank, that puffed-up boy, or you yourself, balance their books with your life. The Hales didn't survive 100 years in this valley, so the last one of them could be sold off like a heifer to save the barn." Clara's eyes filled finally, the first crack in her all morning, and Etta, gentler now, reached across and took her hand. "We're going to save your ranch, honey," she said, "but we're going to do it without selling you to do it. Levi, get my address book. We've got calls to make." But the Calhouns don't wait, and they don't lose quietly. By that afternoon, the whole valley knew the Hale girl had run from the altar, and by the next morning, Royce Calhoun's truck was rolling up my gravel road. Because, of course, in a county this size, it took about a day to figure out whose truck had idled on that shoulder. I went out to meet him on the porch with Scout at my heel, and I'll give Royce this. He's a handsome man, polished, the kind who's never once in his life been told no and means to keep it that way. He didn't come angry. That's the thing about men like the Calhouns. They come reasonable, which is so much worse. "Levi, right?" "The carpenter." He said it the way you'd name a tool. "Look, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Clara's not well. She's been under a lot of stress. She's grieving her father, and yesterday she had a kind of breakdown, which is understandable, but she's not in her right mind, and her family is worried sick. If she's here, the kindest thing, the only decent thing, is to let me take her home where people can care for her." And there it was, smooth as glass. The exact same move I'd watched the men of this world make my whole life. Make the woman the problem. Make her confused, fragile, in need of being managed by the very people she ran from. Paint over the crack and smile. I heard the screen door open behind me, and Clara stepped out onto the porch. Not behind me, beside me, in Etta's spare clothes now, her chin up, though I could see her hands trembling. "I'm right here, Royce," she said, "and I'm in my right mind for the first time in 2 years." His mask slipped for just a second, a flat, cold flicker before the reasonable smile came back. "Clara, sweetheart, come home." My father is prepared to be very generous about all this. "The wedding can be rescheduled. We can make all of this just go away." "There it is," she said softly. "Make it go away. Make me go away." She looked at me, then back at him, and her voice got steadier as she went. "I'm not coming back, Royce. Tell your father the deal's off. I'll find another way to save my ranch, or I'll lose it honest, but I am not going to be the price he pays for it." Royce's jaw tightened, and the polish came off. Just a little, just enough. He looked at me with pure contempt. "You think this changes anything? That note comes due in October. Without us, that ranch is gone and everyone on it, and that'll be on her." He pointed at Clara. "On you. Remember that." And I stepped forward. Between him and her, and I said very quietly, "She told me everything, and I believe every word of it, which is more than I can say for anything that's ever come out of a Calhoun's mouth. Now get off my land. You people have taken enough of this valley. You're not taking her. He stared at me a long second, and whatever he saw made him decide it wasn't the day for it. He drove off slow, the way they do, like he had all the time in the world. He did have time, was the trouble. He had until October. Word travels fast and cruel in a small county, and the version the Calhouns let loose got there first. That poor, unstable Clara Hale had humiliated a good family and run off with the carpenter. That she'd lost her mind with grief, that somebody ought to do something. The first time we went into Marlow together for fence supplies, the feed store went quiet when she walked in, and old women who'd known her since she was a baby suddenly found their shopping very interesting. I watched her shoulders climb up around her ears, and I started to steer her back toward the door, and she stopped me with a hand on my arm. "No," she said low. "I'm done running and I'm done hiding." And she walked up to that counter with her chin level and bought her fence wire and said good morning to every single person who wouldn't meet her eye. And by the time we left, a couple of them had remembered they liked her. And an old rancher named Briggs tipped his hat and said, quiet enough that only we heard it, "Your daddy'd be proud you didn't take their money." Girl, she didn't cry until we were back in the truck. Then she cried the whole way home, and they were the good kind. The kind that come out when you finally stop being ashamed of doing the right thing. The days that followed were the strangest and best I'd had in years. Clara stayed, on Etta's insistence, in Etta's spare room half the time, and at my place the other half. The two ranches 20 minutes apart, and it turned out the woman everyone in the valley pictured as a pampered bride was nothing of the kind. She was a rancher's daughter to the bone. She knew cattle and fence line and irrigation better than I did. She'd grown up bucking hay and pulling calves in the cold, and the soft, expensive life Sterling Calhoun had dangled in front of her had never once fit her, which was half the reason she'd been able to run from it. She started coming with me to my jobs, and then she started coming out to the back 40 in the evenings, where I'd finally started in on my own collapsed barn after 4 years of avoiding it, and the two of us would work until dark, her holding a board steady while I drove the screws, and we'd talk. She told me about her father, who taught her that you measure a person by how they treat the things that can't pay them back. I told her about mine, and about the leaning barn, and about being the carpenter the good families never quite saw as real. "I see you," she said one evening, simple as that. And I had to turn and pretend to look for a tool because my throat had closed up. It crept up on me the way good things do when you've stopped expecting them. In small, ordinary moments I only noticed afterward. The way the house felt different now when I came in from a job, lit, lived in, a kettle warm on the stove, and Scout asleep in a patch of sun and Clara at the table frowning over a feed catalog like it owed her money. The way she started fixing my terrible coffee without being asked and leaving the radio on the country station, I pretended to hate. One night, a summer storm knocked the power out, and we sat by the wood stove eating cold leftover stew straight from the pot, passing one spoon back and forth like a couple of kids, and she told me about the night her father died, how she'd held his hand and promised him she'd keep the ranch, and how that promise had felt like love at the time and had slowly turned into the rope around her neck. I didn't try to fix it. I'd learned, finally, that some things you can't sand back and rebuild. You can only sit beside in the dark until they hurt a little less. She fell asleep against my shoulder that night, and I sat there not moving for 2 hours so I wouldn't wake her, and Scout watched me from the floor like he understood exactly what was happening to me before I did. I should tell you I'd been here before, in a smaller way, and lost. Years back, before I left the valley, there'd been a woman named Dana I thought I'd marry, and she left me for a man with more money and a flatter road. And the lesson I took from it and carried for a decade was that I was a fine enough man to fix somebody's porch, but not a man anybody chose to keep. So even as Clara and I built that barn back up board by board, even as I found myself happier than I had any right to be, a part of me kept waiting for her to remember the soft, expensive life and choose it the way Dana had. I didn't say it. But Etta, who misses nothing, cornered me by her truck one evening and said, "You're holding back on that girl." "She just walked out of one wedding," I said. "Last thing she needs is the carpenter making eyes," Etta snorted. "That girl's been wanted for what she's worth her whole life. Her ranch, her face, her name. You want to do something nobody's ever done for her? Want her for nothing, for free. just because she's her. She poked me in the chest with one bony finger, and quit deciding for her what she's going to choose. That's the Calhoun disease, son. Don't catch it. A week later, Clara took me out to the Hale Ranch for the first time, and I understood her in a way I hadn't before. It was beautiful. A long valley of good grass running up to the timber, a creek through the middle of it, a white house her great-grandfather built, and a barn the size of a church. Maria Mendoza came out to meet us, wiping flour off her hands, and she held Clara's face in both palms and said something soft that made Clara's eyes shine. And their kids, who'd grown up on that ranch the same as Clara had, came running across the yard. Tomas Mendoza had worked that land for 30 years. Their oldest boy was talking about studying agriculture. This place wasn't a job to them. It was the whole shape of their lives. I watched Clara walk her own ranch like a woman saying goodbye to it, touching fence posts as she passed. And I understood that when she'd said she was running from a price, the price wasn't just her own freedom. It was all of this, all of them, weighed against her one stubborn heart. And I understood for the first time how a good person could talk herself into selling her own soul and call it love. Driving home that night, she was quiet a long while, and then she said, "Now you see why I almost married him." "Yeah," I said, "and now I see exactly why you couldn't." But October was coming, and the closer it got, the quieter Clara grew about herself, and I started to see something settling over her that I knew far too well, because I'd watched it settle over my father. Guilt. The Mendozas. The family who'd worked the Hale Ranch for 30 years were going to lose their home and their living if the note came due. Clara's mother, frail and grieving, was going to lose the house she'd raised her children in, and every fair plan Etta and I cobbled together. A credit union loan, a refinance, selling off the far parcel to a sympathetic neighbor, kept hitting the same wall. Because Sterling Calhoun had spent 2 decades making sure no bank in 3 counties would cross him, and the timeline was just too short. One evening I came out to the barn and found Clara sitting on a sawhorse in the half-dark, not working, and she said without looking at me, in a voice gone flat and final, "I have to call Royce." My blood went cold. "Clara, listen to me. If I marry him, all of it goes away. The Mendozas keep their home, my mother keeps her house, the ranch stays Hale land for another generation. If I don't, I lose everything, and so does everyone who ever trusted my family. One person's unhappiness against all of that, Levi, what kind of selfish person picks her own heart over 30 people's homes?" And she said the thing that breaks me to this day, "Some of us were never meant to be the ones who get saved. Some of us were only ever meant to pay." I want to tell you I had a speech ready. I didn't. I just knew with my whole body that I could not let her walk back into that machine, and I knew exactly why. And somewhere in the last few weeks, the reason had stopped being about my father or the valley or even justice, and become entirely simply about her. So I crossed that barn and I knelt down in the sawdust in front of the sawhorse, so she had to look at me, and I said, "No, you don't get to call him. Not because I'm deciding for you. God knows you've had enough of that. But because you're about to make the same mistake my father made, and I will not watch another good person sign themselves away to those people to save a piece of land. Land grows back, Clara. Barns get rebuilt. I rebuild them for a living. But there is exactly one of you, and I am not going to let you bury yourself to balance somebody's books." She was crying now, really crying, the years of it coming loose. "It's not just land," she whispered. "It's everything my father was." "Then we save it the right way," I said, "or we lose it honest, like you said. But we do it together. You are not alone in this, and you are not a price, and you are not somebody who only gets to pay." And then I said the rest of it, because if I didn't say it now, I never would. I've spent my whole life believing I was good enough to fix things, but not good enough for anybody to keep. And then you climbed into my truck soaking wet and told me to just drive. And I have been falling in love with you a little more every single day since. And I don't want to fix you, Clara, because you were never broken. I just want to stand next to you while you fight. That's the whole offer. Same as the first night. You don't have to decide anything. But please, please don't call him." She didn't say anything for a long moment. The light was nearly gone in the barn we'd half rebuilt together, and outside an owl called once across the dark fields, and I knelt there in the sawdust, with my heart hanging all the way out of my chest. And then Clara Hale slid off the sawhorse to her knees in front of me, and she put her hands on either side of my face, the way you'd hold something you'd been afraid to want. And she said, "You're the only person in my whole life who ever told me to stop paying." And she kissed me. And it wasn't careful, and it wasn't a thank you, and it was nothing like the polite frozen thing she must have been bracing for at that altar. It was a woman who'd been wanted for everything except herself, finally being wanted for nothing else at all. When we broke apart, she laughed, wet and disbelieving, and pressed her forehead to mine and said, "We're going to lose the ranch." "Maybe," I said, "but we're going to lose it standing up. Except, and this is the part I still can hardly believe, we didn't lose it." Because the next morning, Etta Boone called every independent rancher left in that valley to her kitchen table. All the ones who'd watched the Calhouns take a little more every year and hated it and felt too small to fight alone, and she laid it out plain. One Hale ranch falling meant they were all next. And those weathered stubborn people, the Mendozas and the rest, did the math on what it would cost each of them to take a piece of the Hale note together as a cooperative. A thing the Calhouns in all their cleverness had never thought small ranchers would have the nerve or the unity to do. It wasn't simple, and it wasn't quick. There were lawyers, and a credit union 2 counties over run by a man who'd lost his own family's place to the Calhouns years back and had been waiting his whole career for exactly this. And there was the matter of Sterling Calhoun's loan terms, which Clara, who'd kept her father's books and knew numbers cold, went through line by line until she found 2 clauses that crossed from hard bargaining into something a judge would not like at all. When the cooperative's lawyer laid those clauses on the table next to a refinance offer the Valley had put together, Sterling Calhoun, for the first time in 30 years, looked at a deal he couldn't win and a fight he didn't want in the daylight. And he took the buyout and let the Hale note go. And he did it with the same cold, reasonable smile his son had, because men like that never admit they lost. But he lost. The Hale ranch stayed Hale land, owned free and clear with the whole valley holding a small, honest piece of it. And the Mendozas kept their home. And Clara's mother kept her house. And not 1 inch of any of it cost Clara a single day of her own life. Royce married a senator's daughter 11 months later in a much bigger church. I hear they're very unhappy. I try not to enjoy that as much as I do. That was a little over a year ago. Clara and I were married this spring in the rebuilt barn on my homestead, our homestead now, with Etta standing up as the closest thing either of us has to family, and the Mendozas and half the independent ranchers in the valley. And Scout in a bow tie he tolerated for exactly 4 minutes. Clara wore her mother's dress, not the gray, ruined silk from that day on the county road, though we still have that one hanging in the back of the closet, because she says it's the most important dress she ever owned. "It's the one I ran in," she tells people when they ask why she kept it. The Hale Ranch and my restoration business and Etta's stubborn north end spread all lean on each other now, the way things in a valley are supposed to, and most evenings you'll find Clara and me out at one barn or another, her holding a board steady while I drive the screws, still putting broken things back together, except neither of us is broken anymore, and I'm not sure we ever really were. Etta comes to Sunday supper most weeks and bullies us both and pretends she isn't lonely. And last month she quietly signed the Boone Ranch into the same little valley cooperative that saved the Hales, so that when she's gone, and she swears she never will be, no Calhoun will ever get their hands on it. Clara's mother laughs again now. The Mendoza's oldest is going off to study agriculture in the fall on a scholarship the cooperative pulled together, and a calf was born in the rebuilt Hale barn this spring, the first one in 3 years. And Clara stood there in the straw and cried over it like a fool. And I loved her so much in that moment I could hardly breathe. We'd just both been told we were broken by people who profited from us believing it. People ask me sometimes how it started, and the honest answer never sounds like a tidy love story because it isn't one. It's a girl in a soaked wedding dress running away from a price, and a truck on a rainy shoulder, and a man who'd decided he wasn't built for love right up until he wasn't given a choice. But I've learned that's how the real ones come. Not on the day everything goes right, but on the day everything finally falls apart enough to let the truth out. She didn't ask me to save her that night in the rain. I want you to know that. She didn't ask me to fix her or rescue her or carry her. She asked me to drive. And I've thought about that 1,000 times since, and I think it's the whole difference between being owned and being loved. The people who love you right don't reach for the wheel. They just climb in beside you, soaking wet and out of options, and trust you to go, and then they spend the rest of their lives going with you. So when she whispered, "Just drive," and I did, that wasn't me rescuing Clara Hale. That was the two of us. Two people who'd spent their whole lives being told what they were worth on paper. Finally driving away from the price of everything, toward the one thing neither of us had ever once been given for free, each other.